Every household has that chest freezer humming in their garage right now, the one packed with $1,000 worth of meat. But what happens when the power goes out? How long before that investment becomes a biohazard you have to pay someone to haul away? 24 hours, maybe 36 if you're lucky. Now picture this. You're an Alaskan homesteader who just brought down a 1,200-pound moose, or you've netted 200 sockeye salmon during the brief summer run. Your winter's protein is lying there in front of you, and the nearest grocery store is 150 miles away on roads that don't exist half the year. Because your food security system doesn't plug into the wall, it doesn't have moving parts. It can't break down because it's built into the landscape itself. The permafrost beneath your feet is your walk-in freezer. The bog behind your cabin is your dairy cooler. The smokehouse by the tree line is your meat processing plant. Today, we're breaking down 15 methods that turn the Alaskan environment into a distributed food storage network. Not because it's quaint or old-fashioned, but because when your life depends on keeping massive quantities of food safe through 8 months of winter, you don't trust systems that can fail. You build systems that literally cannot fail. This is what real food security looks like. Let's start with the most elegant solution of all, turning the planet itself into your refrigerator. The permafrost cellar is exactly what it sounds like. You dig down through what Alaskans call the active layer, the few feet of soil that actually thaws each summer, and you keep digging until you hit ground that has been frozen solid for thousands of years. Permafrost in Alaska remains stable at -2 to -5 degrees Celsius, 28 to 23 Fahrenheit. Your kitchen freezer works harder to stay that cold, and it's fighting a losing battle every time someone opens the door. The Inupiat have been building these sigluac for generations. 1 excavation, 0 maintenance, lifetime of 0 energy freezing. Think about the physics here. The thermal mass of frozen Earth extends down hundreds of feet. The temperature is stable regardless of what's happening on the surface. July heat wave? The permafrost doesn't care. Your moose steaks are sitting at a perfect storage temperature while your neighbor's electric freezer is working overtime and driving up the power bill. But that's just the deep freeze. What about refrigeration? The root cellar operates on the same principle, but targets a different temperature zone. Dig down just 4 to 6 feet in most of Alaska, and you hit the Earth's natural refrigerator zone. 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. Perfect for potatoes, carrots, cabbage, onions, all the vegetables that need to stay cool and humid but not frozen. Here's what's brilliant about this. Instead of fighting the environment, the root cellar partners with it. The Earth maintains that temperature naturally. The soil provides humidity. The darkness prevents sprouting. You've built a crisper drawer the size of a room that operates on geological principles. Now let's talk about bog preservation, because this is where it gets really sophisticated. Sphagnum moss bogs aren't just cold and wet, they're active preservation environments. The moss itself is naturally antiseptic, so much so that field medics used it for wound dressing in World War I. The water is acidic. Oxygen levels are low. Bacteria that cause spoilage can't survive there. Alaskan homesteaders figured out that if you wrap butter or cheese in cloth and submerge it in bog water, it doesn't just stay cold, it actually cools. It stays actively protected from decay. The bog is participating in the preservation process. This is applied biochemistry using materials that have been sitting in the backyard for centuries. But here's where things get even more interesting. Some homesteaders build spring houses over cold, continuously flowing water sources. Unlike the static cooling of a cellar, this is dynamic thermal management. Cold water flows through channels or basins inside a small building. The flowing water pulls heat out of the air and anything placed near it. It's a convection cooling system powered entirely by gravity and the water cycle. The spring house handles the middle zone. Things that need to stay cooler than a root cellar but don't need to freeze solid. Milk, eggs, and fresh butter. Foods with short shelf lives that benefit from active cooling rather than just thermal stability. What you're seeing here is a tiered system. Permafrost cellar for long-term meat storage, root cellar for winter vegetables, bog preservation for dairy, spring house for fresh, perishable items. Each method exploits different properties of the same environment. Different tools for different jobs, all running on the fundamental physics of heat transfer and thermal mass. No electricity required, no moving parts to break, no supply chain for replacement components. The landscape itself becomes your infrastructure. But all the geological cooling in the world won't help if a grizzly decides your food cache is an all-you-can-eat buffet. The elevated bear cache isn't just storage, it's defensive architecture. Every design element represents hard-won knowledge about what a 1,000-pound omnivore can and cannot do. First, height. Minimum 12 feet off the ground, but experienced builders go higher. Grizzlies can rear up on their hind legs and reach 9 feet. Add their standing jump capability, and 12 feet becomes the engineering minimum for safety. But height alone isn't enough. The support posts get wrapped in metal sheathing or fitted with cone-shaped baffles. Smooth surfaces angled downward, because bears are problem solvers and their claws can grip textured wood like a ladder. The cache itself, called quantities in some indigenous languages, is built small and heavy. Just big enough for the food, too small for a bear to get comfortable inside, even if they somehow breach the defenses. The walls are thick logs, the door is reinforced, and everything is designed to make unauthorized entry as difficult and unrewarding as possible. This is a structure built from intimate knowledge of predator behavior. Not just bears either. Wolverines can climb smooth posts that stop bears. Ravens can spot and exploit gaps that seem insignificant. Mice can squeeze through openings you wouldn't think possible. The cache represents thousands of years of observational data about what works and what gets you killed. But the bear cache is just storage. The smokehouse is a transformation. Walk into a working Alaskan smokehouse, and you're entering a chemistry lab disguised as a wooden shed. Two distinct processes are happening here, and understanding the difference is crucial. Cold smoking runs for weeks at low temperatures, 80 degrees Fahrenheit or less. This isn't cooking the fish. This is depositing antimicrobial compounds from the smoke onto the surface while slowly dehydrating the meat. Phenols and other preservative chemicals bind to the proteins. The result is salmon that stays edible for a year without refrigeration. Hot smoking cooks while it preserves. Higher temperatures, shorter time periods. You get food that's ready to eat immediately, but won't last as long in storage. The smokehouse builder has to understand wood selection too. Alder is the gold standard in Alaska. Mild smoke, good burn characteristics, doesn't overpower the fish. Avoid resinous woods that add bitter flavors or potentially harmful compounds. The airflow design matters. Too much ventilation and the smoke dissipates before doing its job. Too little and you get incomplete combustion, which creates the wrong kind of smoke chemistry. The builder is engineering airflow patterns the same way a HVAC technician designs ductwork. Temperature control happens through fuel management and damper adjustment. No thermostats, no electrical controls, just knowledge of how different fire sizes behave in different weather conditions. None of them depend on external power sources or supply chains for replacement parts. They're built from local materials using local knowledge about local conditions. That's not primitive technology, that's appropriate technology, exactly the right tool for the specific job and environment. Now we get to the real science. The methods that don't just protect food from the environment, they actively change the food's internal chemistry to make it hostile to decay. Fat packing works because fat is nature's perfect storage medium. Take your cooked meat, moose roast, duck, whatever you've got, and pack it into a crock or jar. Then cover it completely with rendered fat. Lard, tallow, duck fat, whatever you rendered during cooking. When that fat cools and solidifies, you've created a perfect anaerobic seal. No oxygen reaches the meat, and here's the key. The bacteria that cause spoilage need oxygen to survive. Cut off their air supply and they die. But fat packing does more than just exclude oxygen. Fat is the most energy-dense macronutrient available. 9 calories per gram versus 4 for protein or carbohydrates. When you're facing an Alaskan winter where your body burns through 5,000 calories a day just maintaining core temperature, fat-packed meat isn't just preserved food, it's survival fuel in its most concentrated form. The French call this confit, and they figured out centuries ago that meat stored this way stays edible for months without any refrigeration. Alaskan homesteaders took that knowledge and scaled it up for serious caloric needs. Salt curing attacks the problem from a different angle: cellular dehydration. When you pack meat in salt, osmosis goes to work immediately. The salt draws moisture out of both the meat and any bacteria trying to colonize it. Bacterial cells shrivel and die when their internal water gets pulled out by the salt gradient. But salt curing requires understanding the ratios. Too little salt, and you don't create enough osmotic pressure to kill microbes. Too much, and you end up with leather instead of food. Traditional recipes call for about 3 pounds of salt per 100 pounds of meat for basic preservation, adjusted for climate and storage conditions. The process takes weeks. The salt pulls the moisture to the surface, which you drain off regularly. What you're left with is meat that's fundamentally changed at the cellular level. Denser, more concentrated, shelf-stable for months. Alaskan homesteaders cure everything this way. Moose becomes moose bacon. Salmon becomes salt salmon that keeps through the winter without freezing. Even vegetables can be salt preserved, though the technique varies. Then there's fermentation, which flips the entire script. Instead of killing bacteria, you cultivate the right bacteria to outcompete the wrong ones. Lactobacillus bacteria consume sugars in food and produce lactic acid as waste. That acid lowers the pH of the food environment below the threshold where harmful bacteria can survive. Sauerkraut is the classic example. Shredded cabbage, salt, and thyme. The salt initially suppresses all bacterial activity while drawing out vegetable juices. But gradually, naturally occurring lactobacillus bacteria, which are more salt-tolerant than harmful bacteria, begin multiplying and producing acid. Within a few weeks, you've got an environment so acidic that botulism, salmonella, and other dangerous organisms can't survive. But the food remains alive with beneficial bacteria that actually improve its nutritional value and digestibility. Some traditional Alaskan preservation methods use controlled fermentation of fish or game meat. It's a more advanced technique requiring precise control of temperature, time, and salt ratios. Get it wrong, and you get dangerous spoilage instead of safe preservation. Vinegar pickling achieves similar results through different chemistry. Vinegar is already acidic, typically around 5% acetic acid. When you submerge vegetables in vinegar brine, you immediately create an environment where spoilage bacteria cannot function. No fermentation time required, no bacterial cultivation needed. The acid barrier works instantly and permanently as long as the food stays submerged. Pickled beets, pickled cabbage, pickled wild greens, all the abundant summer vegetables preserved in shelf-stable form for winter consumption. Pressure canning represents the intersection of traditional knowledge and modern food science. A pressure canner heats low-acid foods to 240 degrees Fahrenheit under pressure, temperatures impossible to achieve with simple boiling water. This heat kills botulism spores, which are among the most resistant forms of bacterial life. The process creates commercially sterile food that stays safe at room temperature indefinitely. It's the bridge between traditional preservation and modern convenience, but it still works on a wood-burning stove in a cabin without electricity. Alaskan homesteaders can massive quantities during the brief summer abundance. Salmon, game meat, wild berries, garden vegetables, anything that can be processed gets sealed into jars that won't spoil during the 8-month winter. Simple dehydration removes the fundamental requirement. For bacterial life, water. Microbes need moisture to reproduce and spread. Remove enough water from food and microbial activity stops completely. The food doesn't spoil because the organisms that cause spoilage cannot function in a desiccated environment. Beyond the obvious air-drying methods, homesteaders dry herbs, berries, and mushrooms near wood stoves or in purpose-built solar dehydrators. Blueberries become leather-like concentrated nutrition. Mushrooms become a lightweight protein that reconstitutes in winter stews. Each method exploits different vulnerabilities in the bacterial life cycle. Fat packing eliminates oxygen. Salt curing destroys cellular integrity. Fermentation creates hostile pH levels. Dehydration removes essential moisture. The experienced homesteader doesn't rely on any single technique. They combine methods for compound effectiveness. Salt-cured meat might also be smoked for additional antimicrobial compounds. Fermented vegetables might be stored in root cellars for temperature stability. This is food preservation as applied science, using chemistry and biology as tools rather than hoping temperature alone will solve the problem. Here's where physics meets food security, harnessing the raw power of natural elements to create preservation systems that operate on a building scale. The Arctic wind system is deceptively simple. Set up wooden racks in areas with consistent airflow. Hang thin strips of meat or split fish fillets. Wait for the unique properties of the sub-Arctic climate to do the work. What makes this possible is Alaska's specific atmospheric conditions. Low humidity means moisture evaporates quickly from food surfaces. Constant air movement prevents stagnant pockets where bacteria might establish colonies. Cool temperatures, even in summer, keep food below the danger zone while dehydration happens. This isn't just hang it up and hope. Experienced practitioners read weather patterns like production schedules. They know which wind directions provide consistent drying conditions. They track humidity levels and adjust timing accordingly. They position racks to maximize airflow while protecting from direct precipitation. The method scales infinitely with available space. Processing 50 salmon, use 10 linear feet of rack space. Processing 500, build 50 linear feet of racks. The wind doesn't care about volume. It processes whatever you put in its path. But here's the crucial knowledge: understanding the difference between drying and spoiling. Too much moisture in the air and food rots before it dries. Too much heat and the outside forms a barrier while the inside stays wet and dangerous. Too little airflow and you get uneven drying that creates pockets of bacterial growth. Successful wind drying requires reading the intersection of temperature, humidity, and air movement like a three-dimensional equation that changes throughout the day and season. Spring-powered hydrocooling works on completely different physics: thermal transfer through flowing water. A properly constructed spring house channels cold groundwater through a series of troughs or basins inside an insulated building. The flowing water absorbs heat from the air, and anything placed near it then carries that heat away downstream. This creates what's essentially a gravity-powered air conditioning system. The water temperature stays constant regardless of outside conditions. The flow rate determines cooling capacity. Faster flow pulls more heat away, slower flow provides gentler cooling for delicate items. Homesteaders use spring houses for the middle tier of preservation needs. Fresh milk that needs to stay cold but not freeze. Eggs that require consistent cool temperatures. Butter that needs firm storage without going rock hard. The system requires understanding water flow dynamics. Insufficient flow and the water warms up before completing its cooling circuit. Excessive flow and you waste the resource while creating erosion problems. Proper flow creates continuous heat removal without overwhelming the spring's capacity. Construction details matter enormously. The building needs insulation to prevent external heat from entering. The water channels need proper sizing to maximize surface area contact with air. Drainage systems need design to prevent backflow or stagnation. But when built correctly, a spring house provides decades of reliable cooling using only the natural water cycle as its power source. Solar dehydration amplifies the natural drying process through controlled heat concentration. A solar dehydrator uses transparent covers and dark surfaces to create controlled heating environments that accelerate moisture removal from food. Clear panels allow sunlight to enter while preventing heat from escaping. Dark interior surfaces absorb solar energy and convert it to consistent drying temperatures. Ventilation design controls the process. Intake vents allow fresh air to enter and pick up moisture from drying food. Exhaust vents allow humid air to escape, preventing condensation that would slow dehydration. The key insight is thermal management. Too much heat and you cook the food instead of drying it, destroying nutrients and creating uneven texture. Too little heat and the drying process takes so long that spoilage bacteria gain a foothold. Effective solar dehydrators maintain temperatures between 95 and 145 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on the specific food being processed. Fruits and vegetables dry at lower temperatures. Meat requires higher heat for safety reasons. Alaska's extreme daylight variations actually provide advantages for solar drying. Summer days with 18 to 20 hours of sunlight create extended drying periods that accelerate the process. Positioning dehydrators to track the sun's movement maximizes energy collection throughout the extended daylight period. Controlled freezing during winter months represents the most obvious method, but it's also the most misunderstood. Simply putting food outside when it's negative 40 degrees will freeze it solid. But managing the freeze-thaw cycles during shoulder seasons, spring and fall, requires a sophisticated understanding of temperature patterns and food physics. Ice crystal formation determines food quality after thawing. Rapid freezing creates small ice crystals that cause minimal cellular damage. Slow freezing creates large crystals that rupture cell walls, leading to a mushy texture and nutrient loss when thawed. Successful outdoor freezing requires controlling the freezing rate through proper packaging and placement. Dense wrapping materials slow heat transfer, promoting rapid freezing. Proper air circulation prevents temperature variations that cause repeated freeze-thaw cycles. The real skill lies in timing. Waiting too long into fall and early freeze-thaw cycles damages food before the hard freeze sets in. Starting too early and September warm spells cause spoilage. Reading weather forecasts and understanding local climate patterns determines success or failure. Storage positioning affects freezing. Quality. Ground contact conducts heat away faster, promoting rapid freezing. Elevation exposes food to air temperature variations. Insulated containers maintain stable temperatures but slow initial freezing. Each elemental method, wind, water, solar, controlled freezing, operates on different physical principles, but serves the same fundamental purpose. Removing heat or moisture from food faster than spoilage organisms can establish colonies. The sophistication lies not in the individual techniques, but in understanding which element to harness for which food at which time of year. Wind drying works best during low humidity periods. Solar dehydration peaks during maximum daylight seasons. Spring cooling provides consistent temperatures year-round. Controlled freezing handles bulk preservation during deep winter. This is environmental engineering using the atmosphere, hydrosphere, and seasonal cycles as components in a distributed preservation network that operates independently of any human-built infrastructure. This is where everything comes together. Because here's what separates an Alaskan homesteader from someone just playing with old-timey preservation techniques. Systems thinking. Real food security isn't one method, it's a network. Walk through an established homestead in late fall and you'll see the orchestration. The Permafrost Cellar holds quarters of moose and caribou, your primary protein for 8 months of winter. The smokehouse contains racks of salmon, transformed into shelf-stable nutrition that won't spoil even if temperatures fluctuate. The root cellar stores hundreds of pounds of potatoes, carrots, and cabbage from the brief growing season. Meanwhile, pantry shelves line the walls with canned berries, pickled vegetables, and pressure-canned fish. Crocks of fat-packed duck sit in the coldest corners. Strings of dried herbs hang from ceiling beams. Each preservation method handles what it does best. But here's the crucial insight. Redundancy prevents catastrophe. Let's say spring comes early and your outdoor freezing setup fails. Your smoked fish picks up the protein slack. Root vegetables spoil due to storage problems. Your canned goods provide vitamins and calories. Bear breaks into your cache. The food stored in multiple other locations keeps you fed. This is distributed risk management applied to the most fundamental human need. No single point of failure can compromise your winter survival because you've spread your food security across multiple independent systems. The real expertise lies in knowing which method to use for which food at which time. Fresh salmon in July gets divided between smoking, canning, and fat packing depending on your existing inventory and storage capacity. Moose harvested in September gets allocated between permafrost storage, salt curing, and immediate consumption based on weather patterns and preservation priorities. You're managing a living system that changes throughout the seasons, balancing current consumption against future needs while maximizing the preservation potential of every calorie that comes through your hands. This is engineering resilience into food systems using physics, chemistry, and biological principles that function regardless of supply chains, power grids, or economic conditions. When your survival depends on staying fed through conditions that would kill most people, you don't trust systems that can fail. You build systems that literally cannot fail. When everything else fails, physics still works. An Alaskan homesteader's wealth isn't measured in freezer space or grocery store access. It's measured in a year's worth of calories distributed across systems that can't be turned off. Permafrost that's been frozen for millennia. Wind patterns that predate human civilization. Chemical processes that operate by laws older than technology itself.